So welcome to this latest series of the Trend Detection podcast. I'm really pleased to invite Corey Dickens from Brightly, which is a Siemens company, acquired not long after Senseye, actually. So it's a really interesting company and person to speak to about the goings on there. And plus, we're going to dive into some really interesting topics around digital transformation, CMMS systems, maintenance, and even how the military sort of relates to that as well, which is really fascinating for me. I'd like to first of all ask Corey just to briefly introduce himself and Brightly as well to the people who don't know or haven't heard of Brightly before.
Absolutely. Thanks, Niall. Corey Dickens. I'm a solution consultant at Brightly, also known as Brightly Software. So if you try and look us up on the internet, it's brightlysoftware.com. Again, we were acquired by Siemens, I think around the same time as Senseye was. I think the ink dried on the intent August 2022. Before that, we've gone by a few names, one of which was Dude Solutions. Essentially, the background of the company, they started in 1999 as a cloud-based CMMS. So ever since 1999, we've been a cloud-based CMMS provider. Really started in the school market, gained foot there, grew into other private and government sectors, and then also took on healthcare. So we're a really good fit into all the different business units of Siemens. I think it's a really good fit because we're in industry. We're in, your local infrastructure, whether it's education, higher education, or local government. Then we're also in transportation and healthcare. So again, it's a really nice fit. Really exciting times to be a part of Brightly during all of this. But myself and my background, I've been with Brightly 2 years now. Prior to, I came from manufacturing as a maintenance lead. So at the last place I was, started from complete scratch. Wasn't really any maintenance function being done. No upkeep of the equipment. They were just letting it break. And then the engineer went and took care of it. And then they kept wondering why it kept breaking down. They knew why, right? And it was my job to come in and try and help shift from a reactive culture to a little bit more of a proactive culture. I thought the best way to do that, since it was just myself, was to help automate in some of the scheduling and reminders, because I'm a forgetful person, right? Most maintenance people are. We need help. So I needed a CMMS that was easy to use. It was fairly low cost, right? Cost is a barrier of entry for a lot of people, especially depending on size. And then there were a few other bits and pieces for the CMS that I really needed. And I looked at a few out there. Brightly stood out to me, then Dude Solutions at the time. I fought the good fight. I eventually got it and started implementing. And then it kind of dawned on me it was time for a career change, right? I was starting a family. I lived an hour away. I live in Durham, North Carolina, in the States here. But even before all of that, my background, as you mentioned, was in the military. Was in the Navy. So I was on a destroyer in the Navy, lived in Rota, Spain for a year, stopped in a lot of cool ports, mainly on the Atlantic and European side. I've been to the Persian Gulf as well, and really just kind of floated around for that for a while. So like you mentioned, there are some skills that I learned from that. It was a growing experience, and I honestly call it an accelerator program. So everything that your normal maintenance technicians or general population and industrial setting, what they can experience or what it takes, 10, 15, 20 years to experience, I had it in a 4-year time period. Going from the lowest person on the totem pole to being the administrator of the CMMS to running small teams to even now 10 years in, switching over to the reserve side, running teams of 20 to 25 and overseeing the maintenance departments as a whole for an organization that's been around for 247 years.
Amazing. It puts my background into perspective, I must say. No, it's very, very impressive. I mean, the first thing that sort of fascinated me is when I was obviously doing research, we were just talking about this, but before I was doing some research on your background, and I'm just wondering, first of all, what were the key learnings from the military that you took over? Because there must be. I'm fascinated by people who switch careers like that, go into a different industry, because there's so much experience you can bring along with you as well.
There is, and it's funny because you also mentioned that article that I contributed to. there are a lot of skills that I took away from the military. And initially, I didn't know what they were because I didn't know how the jargon from the military translated to the civilian world and to industry. And there was a huge knowledge gap because no one preps you for it, right? Your job when you're in the military is to be ready to protect the country or go to war, whatever it is, at any moment's notice, right? You're the tip of the spear. There's only so much resources they can provide and fund and buffer they can allow during that transition period because you're still operational while you're in. Now, when you get off your contract, it's kind of like a switch gets flipped and you have to quickly kind of change mindsets, figure things out. The U.S. government has a mandated transition assistance program called TAPS that a lot of all service members have to go through. It's a great program, but again, it's only like a week long, 2 weeks long. There's only so much you can do, and there's so many things, so many different directions people are going in. So that was a missed opportunity for me. I really didn't take advantage of it. I'll take ownership of that. But at the same time, there's only so much that I actually could have learned knowing what I know now. So coming out, it was really kind of a fumble through period of figuring out where I fit in, getting experience, acclimating to the environment and what options are out there. It's funny because I've come across this recently. I think if you talk to most maintenance and reliability professionals, they won't say when I was little, I dreamed of becoming a reliability engineer, right? We kind of just stumble into this career path. And it's all because of a key skill of knowing how to work with our hands and fix things or think on our feet and be problem solvers. So I think those are two critical skills that were matured. I think I was born with them, right? I come from a very blue collar, hardworking family. So I'm not used to any of that, but it matured and it was definitely honed in and fine tuned through the military. So the active maintenance and the definition of maintenance, which is preserving the condition or the operating condition of a piece of equipment, also called capacity assurance. The active maintenance, I think, is really simple. I think fixing a piece of equipment, fixing something, pretty black and white. Most of the time we have instructions for it. Where it becomes difficult is maintenance management. So managing the process around maintenance, how we plan and schedule, how we prioritize, how we build business cases and the economic value of performing this amount of preventative maintenance versus this amount of reactive, right? Like I told my background coming from manufacturing, we were a run to failure maintenance strategy, which is a valid maintenance strategy. My issue with it is, did the current leadership, were they the ones that said, yes, we're going to revalidate this is still our best course of action? Or was it just a plan put in place 20, 40 years ago that people are just willingly accepting and just that's the status quo, right? That's the norm. We're just doing what we've always done. So I think every once in a while, if you're run to failure, you need to challenge that and you need to understand whether it's still the correct action or not. Because in our situation, they stopped manufacturing the equipment and there was no like replacement for the type of equipment we needed. So what used to, you said, hey, we can run it for 20 years, run to failure. It has a lot of inherent reliability. It has a good maintainability and availability score, but we're going to be able to replace it in 10 years. So run to failure is valid. Well, 40 years later, we never replaced it. Either we didn't have the money because improper planning or other things came up, or in our situation, they don't make the equipment anymore. So that really started to pull out the skills that I have, which are not only skills, but also traits. I'm a very observant person by nature. So I not only ask a lot of inquisitive questions in the moment, right? My generation, I'm going to date myself here. When I came into the military, they're like, oh, Gen Y, all y'all do is ask why, right? A lot of people don't know millennials, the actual, like you have boomers and then you have Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, right? Millennials are actually Gen Y. That's our actual like alphabet number or whatever is Gen Y. But people take that and say, oh, all y'all do is ask questions. All y'all ask is why. So coming into the military, it was deterred and it was frowned upon to ask a lot of questions. But again, I was an accelerator 4 years in. I feel like I'd been there for 20 years. I feel like I'm the top dog. I start asking a lot of questions and I start challenging a lot of people on norms that I didn't understand the purpose of. And one of the best leaders I had was like, just go do the job. And when you're done, come back and ask me and I'll explain why we do that. right? But that took a leader to sit there and stand out from the rest and say, a leader versus a manager. A manager just tells you, I don't care, just get it done. They probably don't understand why themselves. That's the way we always do things. Versus a leaders, they have this big perspective. So perspective was something I really learned. I started to think big picture, which helps a lot in manufacturing, because you have to understand not only your piece of the pie of maintenance, but what's the impact on production? What do you need from warehouse? And you have to kind of cultivate and have that big picture mentality to properly do maintenance management. And then on top of that, the problem solving, I think, has been identified as the number one needed skill in manufacturing. Because you can do as much engineering analysis and process improvement as you want, something's going to go wrong. And it's the operator or the maintenance technician that needs to make the quick decision and be able to think on their feet to get things back up and running to minimize downtime.
No, I think the main point I take from that is, I think, and we see this a lot, is that there's often quite a big focus on technology. What technology can we implement? I mean, in your case, it's actually not even that. It's, we've always done it this way, so why should we change? But I think what you're saying, by you joining the business, it's actually a form of culture shift, and it usually takes a catalyst or a person or people, should I say, to do that. So
it takes a gaggle.
Yeah. I mean, so how would you? So how much importance would you place on culture and shifting a mindset away from what's always been done to, this is what we could be doing, and it's, it doesn't have to be scary. It can actually be very, make us work more efficiently.
I think that's the 1,000-pound elephant in most rooms in manufacturing settings, right? It's just change. It's a very good question because it's very pertinent right now, and I see a lot of information about it. Again, my last few LinkedIn posts have all been about culture or leadership versus management, the definitions, because I'm going through a lot of self-learning right now. Again, trying to understand the best practices and proper maintenance management and proper reliability. It's like, I'll show this very quickly. This is the book I got in front of me, Maintenance Reliability Best Practices by the Reliability Sherpa, Ramesh Gulati. I love this thing. It's like the maintenance Bible. And I went to Society of Maintenance Reliability Professionals conference this past year for the first time as a member. And one of the gentlemen I was talking to, he said, if you don't have that book, you don't know anything about maintenance. Right. And I kind of challenged that. I know a lot about maintenance. I didn't know what I didn't know about maintenance management. So, and piece of that is that culture change. And that's a lot of what we're fighting right now. Again, I walked into an organization, been doing certain things, certain ways for 40 years, right? And there's probably been a lot of leadership turnover during that time. So you just inherit what the previous person put in place. I always think leadership is your current situation is what someone did 3 or 5 years ago. That's the decisions they made. That's what you're feeling now, because it's just compounded over time. So the culture change, it takes a lot. And you've seen it from the Senseye side, and Brightly sees it as well. We try to cultivate multiple champions, not just one, right? Like I was that person. I was the only one ever on demos. Everyone else was kind of hands off. They wanted to buffer themselves from the sales process, which is typical. But again, I was able to get my operations manager on board. I was able to get the manufacturing engineer on board. I was able to start building this team of champions. Because I can't remember if it's, I want to say when I was doing my Lean Six Sigma training, the instructor talked about in Japanese culture, if one person takes a problem to a leader and they recommend a solution, 10 times out of 10, they're going to ignore it, right? They're going to squash it. But it's a culture mentality. So if multiple people bring the same problem and support one resolution, the leader's almost obligated to see it through, to try it. Right. So same thing we're trying to do with implementing new technology or just change the culture is it can't be one person. It can't just be the leader sitting in the tower with this grand vision. Like you have to communicate it all the way down. And then you have to constantly like recheck in, reassure what's going on. So culture is huge, and understanding people change management is a very understudied topic in manufacturing that I think a lot of people could benefit from.
Yeah. So let's dive into that. There's that change management piece. So I guess can they benefit from that? I guess to follow on from what you were saying there.
I mean, a lot of people have continuous improvement processes, right? Or they go by operational excellence. So they have these key figures that are supposed to identify these areas of opportunity, these areas that it would benefit the business and build business cases for change. And then they're trying to be the same change agents, but they struggle to message it to the plant floor why it's necessary. Again, it's a lot of resistance there, and you kind of have to frame the conversation in different ways. Because for me, I had operators that had been there for 16 years, and they really wanted to stick to the way we used to do things. They didn't understand. They may have, but I just kept reiterating, our customers have changed, right? The type of product that we made at one time was based on a contract with one customer. And then every year we get requests to re-engineer and make a smaller, more durable, thinner, yet increased break tolerance of like cargo straps, right? That's what we did. We did weaving for cargo straps. Every year people want smaller and smaller, yet stronger. So every year we have to come back and build new weaving plans, and we have to change what we're doing. So when we change a style, the old operators, they're like, no. Like, why is that changing? Right. So it was all about the communication piece. I don't think I did a good job of communicating to them.
So, I mean, we could pick up on that as like a generalization, let's say, in terms of the challenges that you feel customer manufacturers in general, let's say, are facing at the moment.
I think there's a few. Obviously, the changing workforces, right? We're, I think, 4 generations in one workforce right now. And that will be changing soon, right? The Great Resignation hit us during COVID, right? And then now we're about to have, a lot of manufacturers are seeing it. All their tribal knowledge is leaving. All the people that have been around for a very long time, they're leaving the workforce, they're retiring. And now this kind of vacuum happens where new people are moving into leadership positions, new decision makers, new ideas. And at the same time, you have new workers coming in at the bottom, at the entry level, requiring different things, having different perspectives on life, having different challenges. But I think as a maintenance professional, when I'm talking to potential customers now, or customers that are trying to evolve the maintenance department and turn it from a true cost center to a cost saver and really start supporting the business, as we've been talking about, I think it's been talked about for 20 years, they're lacking a lot of resources. I think those resources, almost any kind of resource you can think of, the proper tools to do the job, whether it's an adequate, up-to-date CMMS, or if they're doing predictive maintenance with Senseye. I think it's also money. So money both in funding and staffing the people that they need to do the job. They can't find the people to do the job with the right skills they need. But also the support. That's a huge resource, is having backing from the leadership that this is crucial, and steady backing. Not just one leader comes in, hey, I'm really good at changing cultures and turning this thing around, but then this is a career hop for me. So in 2 to 3 years, I'm out the door and someone new comes in, and then the culture just, they keep trying to go through this refit and recycle every 3 to 4 years, right? And I've seen that with the military. I think I stated that in the article. The Navy is very smart. The Navy's been around for 247 years, right? His Majesty's Navy's been around even longer, the Royal Navy. They're very smart, and we get a lot of what we do from the Royal Navy. A lot of our traditions and heritage and stuff like that. But one thing I think that does need to change soon for the military is the maintenance culture, because we're so programs, policies, and procedures, because we're so used to people. Every ship rotates almost 100% of its crew every 3 to 5 years. So every 6 years, there's all brand new faces that weren't on that ship 6 years prior to. And you have ships being around for 20, 30 years, right? And every time someone new comes in, they want to enact new change, or they want to fix the problems they've seen previously. And then you always blame the other people that came before you, right? And I did the same thing, but the Navy has good mechanisms in place for that, right? They have a lot of auditing, they have inspections, they have outside people come in and try to re-baseline the ship, whether you're performing really well or you're performing bad. Like we're going to try and not bring it down a top performing ship, but bring up the bottom performing ships and have a high operational capacity across the fleet. Manufacturing, you don't have that, right? Leadership changes or the staffing changes sometimes, but there's never like a rebalancing of like we never zero back out to what the previous leadership did. Right. So they don't support maintenance and they defer a lot of valid maintenance jobs that shouldn't have been deferred. Right. The next leadership group is inheriting that maintenance debt that a lot of people will call it, and they don't realize it and they won't know. And they don't do self-assessments to understand what the base condition operating of their equipment is and what it takes to get it back to a sustainable level.
And so when we talk about leadership here, we talk about in the maintenance departments or even higher than that. So the management level, the C level, the C-suite even.
I think you need an executive sponsor, someone at the C-suite or VP levels that understand the importance of maintenance and advocate for them. I think there are a lot of people out there. I've seen that a few times where maintenance professionals have progressed up the chain and now they're like plant managers or regional managers. And it's really cool to see that. And I'm like, okay, you've kind of transcended the ranks, right? But then I also talk to some people where they get like IT managers switch over to run the maintenance team. It's like, okay, if you're a good people leader, you're a good people leader. Like I can see that, right? If you're a true manager, true leader. But again, how far behind are you playing from understanding what needs to happen and how to advocate for your people?
That's an interesting one. I've never heard of that before. Such differing backgrounds. I'm wondering, on the theme of, from your background in the military, moving to a completely different industry, could you provide some thoughts on, say, moving from an IT-led mindset into a sort of maintenance engineering sort of management role?
Again, I haven't seen it too often, but it was kind of top of mind when you mentioned that.
That's
interesting. I have seen it from time to time. But I think that's just a general thing is sometimes when you need leaders and you need someone who's good, you kind of just fill the hole, right? Whether it's someone just adding another cap. Sorry, what was the question?
Well, the other thing I was going to add to that point as well, because you mentioned about Brightly, and it's a very similar thing to Senseye, is we identified quite early that you need the key stakeholders from the very start of projects in order to be successful. I'm just saying, from your experience, because we tend to find that a lot of these projects can either be driven from the IT side or the OT side, or the maintenance side. I mean, from your experience, where do these projects generally be driven by the IT? And it can depend if it's an IT-driven organization or obviously an engineering maintenance-driven organization.
Talking about the culture change?
Yeah, it's whether the decisions about, if we talk about predictive maintenance tools or CMMS tools, where are the decisions driven from? I mean, because we find it could be an IT decision where they want a digital transformation. They want, to scale across they want a tool that's scalable across all plants and can bring the data all into one place. Or it's a maintenance issue, where there's high downtime or, like you said, lack of resources, and they want to automate a lot more of their, maintenance planning, for example. So I'm just sort of interested on that side, really, where that's driven from.
I think it depends based on the scale of manufacturer we're talking about, right? Whether we're talking about true enterprise clients, we're talking about small, medium-sized enterprises. Those are different people in the calls every time. When it's enterprise, it's usually always senior VP of engineering or some C-suite member, right? And IT is involved very early on. Again, they're a little bit, I don't want to say passive in that sense, but they've probably already been informed. They've already had a discussion. They maybe already done an RFQ, right? So a lot of their questions from an IT perspective have already been answered. When we're talking about small, medium-sized manufacturers, it really depends. Sometimes I'm talking straight to IT people that are doing this because the maintenance people don't have time, or maybe they don't listen to their decision and their input. Sometimes it's directly from the plant manager, and sometimes it's like the lead or the maintenance manager of the maintenance team, right? And then at that point, has your organization procured software like this before? Yes or no? Like cloud-based software. If yes, okay, have you talked to the person that led that team last time? Go pick their brain. Like, what were the hoops they had to jump through? What are ways you can go on and start mitigating some of the hurdles and the speed bumps you're gonna see by talking to someone who has experience? Or if you're like me, there's really no one to go to. So now you have to build your own team. So I always recommend very early on going and talking to IT, bring them into the conversation as soon as possible, right? Because as you're used to, when you get up to that final decision maker, the plant manager, the CEO, they're going to look at you, they're going to look at IT, they're going to look at a few stakeholders and say, did you sign off on this? What are your thoughts? So imagine going into that conversation with the IT person, whoever they are, on board with you 100% because they've already vetted the software. They too understand the benefits going to have. They understand their hands off because it's cloud based, right? Or if it's an OT IT difference, and then bringing in the OT engineer architects, and then having all those champions go up and already ready for the presentation and already backing you, right? It's kind of hard to say no at that point, especially you have the data to back it up too. It's really hard to beat data and key decision makers supporting a single decision, a single vision.
No, exactly. I think, especially from a Senseye perspective, we've seen too often where key decision makers or key departments, say, are brought in too late. As in, say, you're talking to maintenance. It could happen either way, but talking to maintenance people to start with, they're on board, they're really excited about what can be done, and then all of a sudden there's IT saying, "Oh, this wasn't in our plan. We've got this planned instead,"
Yeah.
or that's 3 years down the line, and then the whole thing sort of collapses. And a lot of, so obviously, as you know, it's a complex sale. It's lots of stakeholders, lots of workshops. To see the value. Obviously, the rewards are big as well, so that's why it's so worth the effort. But it's not worth the effort if you're you're doing all these sessions, putting all the time in to build a business case and everything to it, the rug being pulled underneath because not everyone's on the same path, I guess.
And it's always last minute, it's unexpected, and then it almost delays. In my case, I didn't involve IT, who just happened to be the same person that controlled the finances. So he rightfully had two angles. And generally when you're talking to IT professionals, one thing I wish the maintenance team would understand is they don't just sit in the back closet in the server room, right, and play Candy Crush on their phones. We all know that, right? They are very busy. They have enough work on their plates and enough things they're looking forward to or projects they're working on to staff them and probably more people for the next 3 to 5 years, right? They have the exact same problems that maintenance do. And their first initial reaction to stuff like this is going to be defensive because that's kind of they are the defense layer for the network side of a company and the data protection. That's their job, is to act first in defense of an organization and protect what they can, because they don't know you from you who actually understands what you're talking about and like what the implications could be. I mean, how easy is it for me as a maintenance guy to be like, hey, I had someone call me about some wireless sensors that go through cellular, right? And it translates some data off of a piece of equipment. You don't have to do anything. Don't worry about it, right? Okay, well, what piece of equipment is that under a defense contract? Is that something that we have to like firewall and protect, right? There's a lot of, I'm not a tech person. I'm not an IT person, by the way, disclaimer. Hope everyone figured that out already. But I can sympathize and I can understand with the challenges that an IT organization has to face and why they come at things defensively first. And again, if you approach them for help early on, that changes the whole tone. But coming at someone as like the pit stop right before you go to the final signature, saying, hey, by the way, can you sign this off? Well, yeah, when do you need it? Like what information, how long do I have to review it? Oh, well, I was hoping you just sign it now and I go to them and sign it off, right? Like that doesn't work on any level in any case. So yeah, I've done a presentation at our Illuminate, which is our user conference. I did it in March, and it was about selling technology internally, kind of a simple framework. I took a 4-step process from the military called the OODA loop, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. And it's a simple 4-step decision-making process. It was used by fighter pilots of the Air Force back in the day. Because again, if you think about Top Gun, right? In Top Gun, you're doing aerial dogfighting. And if you don't know where your enemy is, the capabilities of their aircraft or their tactics, and they get behind you, you're done. You're dead, right? And you're 40,000 feet in the air, 30,000, whatever it is. So you need to be able to observe the situation, orient yourself to your capabilities and their capabilities, and then quickly decide the best course of action with limited information. And then you need to act quickly. Now, there's nothing particular that pertains to dogfighting in an industrial setting or selling business cases. But I thought it was a very simple 4-step process of just understanding where you are, understanding where you want to be, deciding on a best course of action or finding the solution that gets you where you need to be, and then acting, like building the business case, presenting it. And in the decision phase is a lot of considerations given to not only how to present, what to build into your technical presentation, that I've learned from best practices from a few other sources that I've read up on that do technical presentations, but also what considerations to be given during the early stages of the evaluation. Because again, if you go to IT and they already have the digital transformation strategy and they say, hey, the CMMS is on the docket for next year. Okay, well, what can I do to help? Or is there a potential to expedite this? Yes or no? Right? If no, there's no chance of expediting it. Cool. Let me add myself to the working team or the project lead that's responsible for that project. And let me start adding value, doing some research. Now, if you're a manufacturing environment that has an exuberant amount of downtime that's very costly per minute, let's say automotive, tier 1 automotive manufacturers, it can be tens of thousands of dollars per minute or per hour of equipment not running. That's a pretty time sensitive and very emotional impact to a business and organization. Plus, if you're doing just-in-time delivery, right, that's a whole slew of third order and fourth order effects that are going to come of that. But again, if someone's saying, hey, our CMMS, we got an ice cream truck outside.
Oh, can you hear that?
Yeah. I was wondering where that was coming from.
That came through. Yeah, because it's a sunny day in the UK. For those listening in, it's very sunny in the
just
UK.
Threw me off for a second.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. So again, if you have that emotional impact and you can quantify the value, again, it becomes a risk game. You need to present the risk to the business. So again, if your CMMS or your solution is later on down the journey, building a business case and showing them like, hey, this is the potential risk between now and then of what can happen if we don't implement something that fixes this and mitigates this risk. That's where I think maintenance, not only talk about it later as a sustainability function. I think Max Baer is the one who I saw that works with Siemens that has that his tagline, and I really enjoy that. Maintenance is also a risk mitigation function. It's all about mitigating risk. And maintenance is mitigating risk to loss of production and loss of revenue.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's interesting you touch upon that as well, because especially the cost of automotive in particular. But what are those key metrics that will help? Let's say if a CMMS project is being scheduled in for next year, and obviously metrics are a key part of maybe moving it further up the priority list. But what metrics should be taken into consideration, sort of grab attention? And I guess how, from a Brightly point of view, how do you help to help the prospect customer to present that internally?
I think there are a few key ones. And again, it depends on where you are in the journey. Are you starting from scratch with no CMMS? You're coming off pen and paper or Excel. How reactive to preventative are you already? And then are you coming over from an existing CMMS that you outgrew, right? Each one of those is going to present a different pain point or a different reason, which has a different inherent metric or ROI presentation that we need to help arm them with to sell, right? It's not about us presenting the ROI. It's about getting the data from them, putting it into a simple equation, and then giving them the data and letting them present on it. I think if you're starting from complete scratch, it's going to be the ROI of performing preventative maintenance. What is the ROI? Right. And we refer a lot to a Jones Lang LaSalle study that was done and I think pushed by IFMA, which was talking about for facility envelope, certain units, you can expect an ROI of 545%. for doing preventative maintenance versus reactive maintenance. And they gave an example of a 350-ton chiller, right, for a facility. They said, if you do basic non-intrusive maintenance for, let's say, 10 years, right, versus you run it into the dirt after 6, and then you need another capital replacement. Let's say that thing costs $350,000 to procure. 6 years in, you're $700,000 into 2 assets. Versus if you did the $350,000 up front and then $5,500, this was their example. I was just looking at it yesterday. $5,500 per year on top of the acquisition cost after 6 or 7 years. Again, that's where you start seeing that ROI. And that may not be 545%, but they stayed in there. The longer you can delay a capital expenditure, the longer your preventive maintenance adds to the useful life of the equipment, the higher the ROI becomes. That's what everyone's trying to do is, again, our situation. If we would have taken care of those assets when they were very early on and very early in their operational phase versus a run to failure for 20 years, they probably would have been easier to maintain. Our first pass quality pass probably would have been much higher as well. And we wouldn't have probably had some of the issues that we had. But nevertheless, we were where we were. So starting for me from complete scratch, it was a little bit about the cost of performing preventative maintenance, maybe the inventory that I could save, although initially the maintenance cost side of it, right? People want to cut maintenance cost. It's like, well, to do that, that's a long-term play. If you want to cut maintenance costs in the short term, lay off your maintenance staff. Stop performing preventative maintenance. You'll cut your maintenance costs real quick. But then all of a sudden, 5 years later, you're having to bring on or outsource very expensive maintenance and skilled professionals or contractors. And they're costing you an arm and a leg because they're having to go, top to bottom, nut to soup, replacing every component, essentially doing an overhaul, which again, in that PM to RM example, isn't cost effective. So I think that's the first one. Again, if you're more mature, it starts becoming, what is the utilization of the software? What is the adoption rate? And what are the efficiency gains from it? And I think if you're very mature, it becomes the scheduling compliance, right? How often are you staying within the set estimated hours, estimated days of the schedule? Are you staying on task? And it also becomes kind of the precision of the preventive maintenance. So in my situation, I didn't have the resources to do a failure modes effects analysis, an FMEA, or a reliability center maintenance study. Again, we were too far in the asset life, but I didn't have anything to say, okay, these are the recommended and economical value preventive maintenance schedules, the service levels to perform. I didn't have anything like that. So I was starting from complete scratch versus certain people like the Navy, you can over preventative maintenance your equipment to a point it's too intrusive and it's too costly. And the Navy's actually starting to try and modernize now and go to what they consider condition-based maintenance plus. So again, starting to tap into condition of their assets, viewing the asset health, get leading indicators of potential failures and catching it earlier on the PF curve versus, just overperforming and leaving it in this high state, which honestly, from my background, a lot of people start to gun deck. And I say gun deck, it's pencil whipping, rubber stamping, right? They just sign it off because they don't, if I have to go grease something that hasn't moved in a month every single time, like what's the point, right? No one teaches us about viscosity and lubrication breakdown. No one teaches us, no one I think in the military really understands why we do what we do. We just do it. And we're zombies, right? We have these written procedures a mile long and we just do it. So I think we need a cultural change of doing more value add maintenance versus just time-based maintenance.
And is the I'll say reluctance, because you're saying the Navy in that example are taking steps towards away from reactive to condition-based, or actually saying over maintenance, which is that phrase, over maintenance is better than failure. So
I mean, yes, right. Yeah. Especially when you're talking about a ship that is a culmination of multiple components and systems that work interoperably and have to be ready on a moment's notice. That was my thing. I was a large weapon system maintainer and operator. So my weapon system was the tip of the spear. It was the first thing that we would start moving and potentially shoot if something was threatening us, right? So my gun had to work. And it's a definition of reliability, like the probability of it working when it's intended or needed to work in its intended function. That's not exactly the definition of that's my version. It's close enough. But again, it has to be a reliable asset. So we have to do that maintenance. But again, I can tell you right now, half of the maintenance I didn't need to do. We could easily put some HMI on it that could easily go to a diagnostic page and it can tell me what the current voltage draws are, right? Or we can go through usage-based grease change versus time-based. So again, if I operate the machine in a given month, cool. I do a pre-use preventive maintenance check and I do a post-use maintenance check. But then I also have 40 maintenance intervals in between if nothing is done, nothing moves. So I thought it was overkill. Yeah. I thought we could do a better use of our time. And I think we lacked a lot of the data to understand.
Yeah. And I guess if we flip that into what you were talking about earlier, in a manufacturing environment, there's skill shortages and things like that. So that's where being more precise in your maintenance about where to focus your attention becomes more important. But I see the comparison with the military, where presumably you're not using that weapon all of the time.
Yeah.
So it's like I said, does it need that level of maintenance? But without the data or the condition monitoring data, you don't really know. So you just do it as a matter of course, as part of the schedule, and that's that. And then it's safe, as it were.
Yeah, because I mean, again, the Navy is very smart. They've been around for a long time. They figured it out, but they're also about the most risk-adverse organization I've ever met. Right? Everything has to be bulletproof. You can't, like the Navy, they can't take any chances. And because people change so often, they have to have this extensive, exhaustive program that controls every facet of what people do all day long. The issue becomes now we start to prioritize other functions that are critical to the ship over being able to schedule and do our maintenance. So that's where that pencil whipping came in. Was I, as a maintenance operator, I had all the resources I need. I had the materials, I had the job plans, I had the backing that the system we used was score based. So on a weekly basis, if you complied with the schedule, got everything done, you got 100. If anything moved and wasn't performed, it rolled over to the next week and it just kept hitting your score. So we would do these routine assessments of our work centers, our shops, we'd call them, and it was all score based. Like, what is your score? And administratively, are all of your everything validated and squared away through your maintenance index? And it became like a dog and pony show. And it was very much less about, did you actually perform the maintenance? And I turned it into more, you have to prove that I didn't do the maintenance, which is the wrong mentality. That's not good for anyone. And I'm not the only one that had that mentality, right? And I'm not the only generation of sailors who have ever come through the Navy on these ships that have had that mentality. So how do we go against the grain there of a culture that has been set in stone for so long and start to make meaningful impact changes? And I think the condition-based monitoring plus that they're going to is going to make some significant changes towards that.
And just on that, so they're often with those type of industries, defense and aerospace, the question about cloud often arises. Is that what will hold back military organizations from fully embracing, let's say predictive maintenance technology or even CMMS technology, I guess, as well?
Cloud, yes, to a certain extent, because on a ship, it's metal. So we have repeaters for a certain type of walkie-talkie that we have on the ship because we use walkie-talkies. And we also have sound-powered telephones still. But think of the cabling. We only have so much space, and those are pass-throughs between compartments. So they have to be sealed and they be controlled. We have a lot of cabling nowadays through ships. Now imagine if we're hooking up thousands of sensors per equipment to start doing this. So it has to be a local network, and it has to be hardwired. We don't have the ability to do wireless or Bluetooth or anything because it's a steel ship. It's steel bulkheads, right? Certain areas I think are even maybe laced with like the Faraday cage and information. So again, nothing gets in and out, like no signal, no nothing. So I think it's interesting how they're going about it now. To get into those spaces, I think companies like Senseye really has to invest in that offering as a standalone and have to essentially download a version of your offering and really build it out on a local VM or server-based solution, and then figure out all the specifics on how to hardwire into equipment when you're based on a cloud philosophy and Bluetooth connectivity, wireless connectivity, right? And it's a different ballgame. So I think for land-based teams, I think cloud is what they've already been adopting. They've been doing it for a while. I don't think that's hard. But when we're talking about the Navy and seagoing vessels that are floating metal ships, it's a very tough challenge that a lot of very smart engineers are working on right now. And I don't envy them at all. They have a very tough job, and I am not that smart for that job. Let's be honest.
Oh, I'm sure you are. But no, but I can see the it's mind-boggling, really. Those sort of challenges and the responsibility as well. Is like we're talking about, very expensive equipment. Hence why that's usually the equipment in a manufacturing setting or whatever that's usually over-maintained, right? Because that's what they focus on. And often in predictive maintenance projects, that's again, let's focus on the 5 assets that are causing us the most problems.
Yeah.
But the problem arises because they've been so over-maintained that there never is a problem. And predictive maintenance doesn't actually do the job it's set out to do, which is to spot failure. So
it's all about context. And the trend detection thing, same thing with the business case, right? You need to identify where the potential failure points will be in building your business case and how to communicate this. And you need to try and get ahead of it. Like we talked about, y'all had the article come out about how to prevent failure in an offering that is meant to predict failure. So I thought that was very clever and very interesting.
Yeah. One of our white papers as well, and it's also very much focused around the data piece as well, which we haven't covered. But I thought as we're sort of starting to talk more technology than maintenance, I see our conversation shifting. So I thought, and we've covered a couple of technologies. Obviously, Senseye and Brightly have their own technologies. But could you just give us a broad, from your experience, what technologies some companies or manufacturers are sort of investing in today, to build out that tech ecosystem, as a lot would call it?
So now you're starting to get into areas that obviously I am not the top of the food chain. I do not have much understanding of, but I really geek out on. There's a few people. I've connected a few times with Jeff Winter on LinkedIn. Used to work for Microsoft. I think now is at Hitachi. And he's a digital transformation industry 4.0 expert, right? He's a thought leader in the space. So I follow a lot of his information. I really like statistics, and I like pretty visuals and graphs, which he posts. So he talks a lot about that. I think IoT Analytics also talks about the quarterly earning calls of what CEOs talk about and kind of which ones are growing or fading in importance. And then another person I'll throw out is Walker Reynolds. So Intellic Solutions, or also Industry 4.0. He is a solutions architect. He talks a lot about industry, Internet of Things, IIoT. And he has a lot of old whiteboard videos on YouTube that I have really dived deep into and have learned a lot of information. So it's cool, again, to being that observant person I am, starting to piece together the big picture and how little piece of the pie a true maintenance function is, yet it's still a business pillar that everyone talks about. So what technologies and who are implementing them?
I mean, we could look at we could start with the basics, I guess. What we're both here for in some ways is sort of predictive maintenance, CMMS. But there's EAM systems as well, and they all sort of form sort of pieces of the jigsaw. And I guess a lot of those can work in silos if there's not let's say a joined up approach across the enterprise or across plants. And what we find is often there's separate. It's very like every plant has their own plan, their own strategy. Whereas the most successful rollouts of purely predictive maintenance here is a joined up approach across the board with champions or champions leading that from the front. and becoming almost an internal salesperson, you could term them as.
I think the first thing for people to do is, again, maybe check out those people I was talking about between Jeff and Walker. They really need to start sifting through the noise of what the buzzwords are and start figuring out what the actual definitions are so they can understand where they need to start. We mentioned digital transformation, industry 4.0. Some people use those interchangeably. I think you really have to sift through that and figure out what it means and really get to the root of it, which you said. I was looking at the podcast that Nate did, and that's one of the first things Nate said is he was like, I'm not fighting against other solution providers. I'm not fighting against anything other than misconception of what we do and what is the actual benefit, right? It's not some like wizardry that we just come in and solve all your problems. Some people think CMMS is the same thing. Now, looking in the big picture of manufacturing, again, my background and where I really live and thrive is in CMMS, EAM. But go look out there on like in any like the I think Mesa International has the new digital thread. Nothing on there about EAM or CMS. They don't call it out specifically, right? But you're talking about like asset life cycle. And then same thing with the ISA 95 automation stack, right? Where it talks about like edge and how information kind of cascades or flows through an organization in a true integrated format. It's like, okay, with some places say that CMMSs fall into MOMS, which is manufacturing operation management systems, I believe. That may be wrong. And then some others have EAM as a separate bucket. It's like, okay, is CMMS in the same place as EAM or no? Like, what's the difference? So again, people need to understand what the differences are. If we're talking about the lowest level, CMMSs, I think, should be a pillar and critical and a starting point for most organizations for their maintenance efforts. Right? You grow into an EAM. I don't think you should start as an EAM. I also don't think you should, without diligent research, procure ERPs and anticipate using their maintenance module. I think a lot of big ERPs do have that, which is fine, right? A jack of all trades, a master of none. That's fine. If it actually fits your need and it fits your solution and what you're looking to accomplish, right? But if you're coming to us saying, hey, we need something easy to use, we just really need it basic and we need it mobile so our guys can use it and we need it to speak their language, you can't not go with the CMMS. It was built for the purpose of maintenance individuals. Most of us build our applications through the lens of maintenance jargon, right? Through maintenance reliability best practices, what SMRP and these different organizations who are trying to standardize the terminology internationally. That's a big issue that we have is the standardization of those definitions of what different things mean in different countries, because there is a language barrier at times, which ISO tries to do a really good job of. I think the CMMS is crucial. I think it's the first place that you start. Now, from there, you don't have to like linearly progress through your maintenance adoption periods and your maturity scale. So we think of going from reactive to proactive, which could include your corrective actions, your failure finding, your routine maintenance, your preventative maintenance stuff, even on to PDM, right? Dave Griffith from the Manufacturing Hub talked about this in a comment that I saw. Was he's been in facilities where maintenance teams struggled to comply with the PM schedules, right? Because they weren't established for their organization. It didn't meet the organization's requirements for service levels. But they did really well at PDM and carrying out PDM recommendations for maintenance, right? And then others, they have no need for PDM. They really just need the basic preventive maintenance routines with some reactive maintenance sprinkled in, right? So you have to find the balance for you. And you don't have to be linear. You don't have to say, I have to have a CMS and they have to grow into an EAM and then I can grow into PDM and then I can do this, right? It doesn't have to be linear. You do have a base level, a base function somewhere. I think a CMMS is that. Because for maintenance, it's your asset registry. It's your inventory management. It's your work order execution between preventative or scheduled maintenance and non-scheduled maintenance. And it gives them the KPIs or the data that they need to make their decisions at their level or communicate that to decision makers. And I think PDM just really like supersizes it all, takes it to the next level. So people looking for optimization of your current maintenance resources, I think PDM is the place to go, right? Because it's doing the needed maintenance at the opportune moment, not just when we think based on a preconceived notion when we're supposed to do things. Same thing with the Navy, right? We just over PM things, but that's a procedural and organization mandate. If they do start shifting to predictive maintenance and start using trend analysis and historical data sets to really understand how their assets operate and do a hybrid of the two, they're going to see huge efficiency gains. And then I also think the military needs to start incorporating maintenance and reliability leaders to come teach these people very early on in their career the importance of what they're doing and why they're performing these actions.
No, interesting. I mean, always feel that with predictive maintenance, actually, I guess some, and it's part of the educational bit, I guess, which partly I'm responsible for from a marketing perspective, but like, when's the right time to introduce predictive maintenance? Because like I say, it's very difficult to do it without some of the other layers in place. I'm just wondering, is there a misconception, I guess, about what a CMS can do? Because often, I mean, the predictive maintenance or Senseye example is, you turn it on and you hear AI and the magic happens, and then everything's fine. And what you were talking about in that podcast is he does spend a lot of time busting some of those myths, which has to be said. Because like I said, we don't want to get into a position where we start engaging with a client and then partway down the road they're like, oh, I thought it was just and there's a gap between what was expected. But are those expectations the same with someone who's not got CMMS? They're doing maybe more traditional maintenance practices and they want to go to that next level. Is there a misconception about what a CMS can actually do for them?
Oh yeah. I don't think it's as prevalent, because I think predictive maintenance is still in the realm of a buzzword versus the CMMS, right? Has been around since the 80s. Again, I don't know how long PDM has been around, but CMMSs have been around for a long time. And I think most of the time the misconception is it's only for the biggest and the richest, right? Because traditionally, before cloud, before Industry 4.0, right, when we were in true Industry 3.0, the best in breed systems cost you an arm and a leg, and only the biggest and the top dogs could afford it, right? And they also had the organizations to do it, right? A lot of people ask, how much administrative function is this going to take to support? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, they're like, well, do I have to go do this and do that? Blah, blah, blah. There are some misconceptions, not nearly, I think, as many as PDM and what you see on your team. And Nate hit it on the head, is in sales, you get the best of both worlds. You get the good and the bad, unfortunately, right? You get to see all the success stories, and you also get to get on these calls with people, unfortunately, who have these preconceived notions, and it almost turns into less of a presentation and more of, I hate to say, almost education, right? Let's make sure we're talking about the same thing in the same way first. And I need to go against the grain on some of the information that they have, that they preconceived about what CMMSs are, what are the functions of it, what are the uses, the best practices for its use. There are a few of those. And it comes from generally people either having never used a CMMS or using very old antiquated CMMSs up until recently. So still using CMMSs that look like DOS-based systems, right? And then looking at our system like, that's too much. It's too flashy. There's too many colors. So it's like, what's the expectation here?
And just on that expectation piece, I guess it's for my own education as well. But again, this could probably differ by the situation. But how easy in general is it to implement a CMMS tool, and what sort of we talked about culture quite a lot on this podcast, but and what sort of culture shift is required for a CMMS? So we know that's the case for predictive maintenance, for example.
I think you're talking to the right person, because I have implemented a CMMS
there you go.
when it was really only me. So I was the only person responsible for anything. But again, I felt I bared a lot of burden for that too, because I was like, oh, this is on my shoulders. If this fails, This is me. This is only me, right? I'm the only one. I went to bat for this. I did everything. Implementing is not hard. Again, depending on the solution, depending on your needs, you really have to break it out. It's a long-term play, right? I've said it a few times. Maintenance management is a long-term play. It's not a short-term game. I even remember going through the conversation and I told my leadership, they're like, when can we expect to see a return on investment or start seeing like quality data that we can act on? I had no experience. I had done some research on, excuse me, on Google, and ChatGPT wasn't around at the time, right? So I couldn't ask ChatGPT. That's a different conversation. But I was trying to figure out what the ROI and when I could expect to see, the data. And for my time in the Navy, I became very data driven. I started to find the reports that I thought were meaningful to me and help tell a story and help articulate my point of view of why I needed things, or why I needed more money, or why I needed more resources. So for me, I wanted to undersell, or I wanted to underpromise and overdeliver. So I was like, oh, it'll be like 18 months until we start seeing, good quality data to inform our decisions, right? When in reality, depending on what data I needed, I could have mapped that day one, and that could have been the priority focus on implementation. I'll talk for timeline here. My orientation call was on Monday. All of my assets were built in my system by midweek. I didn't have many. I had like 125. I put it in an Excel spreadsheet and I gave it to my implementation team. They imported it to the solution for me. And then by Friday, I was already documenting reactive tickets against assets. But again, I wasn't in a preventive maintenance state. So I wasn't building preventive maintenance schedules yet. Over time, I organically started building my inventory management, because every purchase order I went and got signed had line items on it. I would take those line items. I would sit down at my desk at the end of the day and I would build part profiles with supplier information, lead time, the quantity that I wanted to be my safety stock level, which I had no idea how to stock or how to build and understand what a true safety stock level was. I was flying by the seat of my pants. But I can honestly say a week into having access to my CMMS, I was utilizing it and I was documenting work orders from the plant floor. Now, months until I was able to generate a good report that started to say, because one of my big things, they didn't understand what I was doing. They're like, oh, we know you're busy. We know you're running around. You're taking care of a lot of things. I couldn't quantify anything. And by not being able to quantify things, I was just another person with an opinion. And maintenance people get it a lot. We cry wolf. We cry for these replacement of assets. We cry for resources. We cry for all this stuff. And crying probably isn't the right term, but we're very vocal about it. So without data, they're just kind of like, we've heard it before, right? But now if I can start to quantify and show some data, now some phase 2 can get kicked off, which is starting to either retrain operators on best practices by building data, right? Like how many failures were due to lack of procedures followed by the operators, right? Operators, they're not wrong. They're only a byproduct of what they've been taught. And again, the culture of the company. So I'm not blaming operators when I say it's an operator error-based issue. Is it lack of documentation? Is it lack of training, right? It's an organizational thing. It's a culture thing. Just like if you try to move a maintenance organization or a company culture from reactive to proactive, that takes everyone. Talked about what it takes to sell. The business case is the C-suite, but you also need to get warehouse on board. You need to get your production floor on board. You need to get the production schedulers. Like it becomes a culture, because you only start identifying these problems if you don't have sensors, through word of mouth, through request portal. And if they're not on board with it and they don't understand what's in it for them, how it's going to make their life easier, how it's going to help them hit their production numbers, or justify that the downtime was based on maintenance related issue, not them just running idle, then they'll start to slowly gain traction and come on board with it. So implementation, CMMS, I've seen it as easy as 1 week. You're up and running, right? But it depends on your need. How much data are you bringing over with you? What are your priorities? What are the pain points of why you're switching or implementing a new CMMS? So it's probably similar. It's a more mature conversation when we start talking PDM, right? Because at this point, your customers hopefully have the data to understand where their top 5 contributing assets to downtime are. They've probably already quantified the cost per unit of downtime or cost per machine per hour of downtime. So the business case is already built. Now you just have to show how easy your solution is to fit into that piece. And again, is it something that just it fits the business need, or does the business have to change what they're doing to fit the solution? And that's something that none of us ever want to do. We don't want to change the business process to mirror the solution. We want our solutions to plug and play into the culture that they're cultivating.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's, when I mentioned the ecosystem, I guess that's what I'm referring to, that it should form part of existing workflows. And to that point, the other challenge, I guess, well, it sounds like CMMS is on occasion can be implemented quickly, but I guess it's the other piece, the culture, but also the adoption of the technology. So there's one thing implementing technology, but it's actually getting people to believe in what's there and using the information that's there, in their day-to-day life or day-to-day working life.
I think, and sometimes, again, that's a long-term plan. I've talked to people in very large organizations. It's taken 5 to 6 years to fully say they've launched their CMMS. Right. But that's because you're talking about a few hundred touch points, end users trying to adopt a new software that maybe, again, this enterprise had 5 distinct decentralized business units who were all doing their own thing in different forms and fashions. Right. Some were probably very immature in their maintenance practices. Some were probably very mature. And then now you're trying to create a baseline. So again, you're going against the grain in a lot of places for a lot of people. It's a lot of moving parts. Again, I think it's all about the messaging and the culture. So the messaging down to the end users, what's in it for you and what's the benefit. And sometimes that takes data.
Exactly. No, definitely. I just wanted to move on. Actually, well, sadly, we're coming, I guess, towards the end in some ways, but it's just absolutely flown by, I have to say.
No. There's probably a few pieces being cut out here and there, but
no, well, maybe here and there, but no one needs to know about that. We're perfect. We never make mistakes, so it's fine. Yeah. But I wanted just to touch on, because we've talked a lot about maintenance practices, and I guess that buzzword, as we've already mentioned, it's sustainability, which is also another very important part of the equation. So I guess my question would be, how can maintenance professionals work more sustainably, and how do the tools that we've discussed sort of help with that?
I hate to say it, but again, it comes back to defining what sustainability is and why it's important for them, and the messaging to them to understand why it's important and what they can do to help. Right? If we're talking about ESG in the broad sense, and you're just talking about the environmental piece, right? The operators or the technicians have a very hard time correlating their actions on a day-to-day basis with the overall emissions footprint of the facility. Right? I was in a facility, it was 2 buildings on one plot of land, one campus, and we're pretty climate controlled. I wouldn't say we had a great system, but we didn't have to. We weren't very process driven. We weren't like food and beverage. We weren't pharmaceutical industry that had to be temperature regulated. But at the same time, in the summertime here in North Carolina, it gets pretty warm. It gets pretty muggy and humid as well. We have the AC down pretty low to try and pump. And then either the warehouse team running things back and forth between different buildings, opening bay doors. I mean, now I can look back and see how much of the energy is just flowing out the door, right? Through trying to climate control a building and then leave a bay door open for 30 minutes to an hour, right? Or if it got too hot in there, even with the AC, we open the doors, but we don't think to turn off the AC. So that's a lot of waste. So that's how you start thinking of framing, and it takes a little bit of education to the operators and to your front line of how are their impacts, on a micro scale, multiplying up to a macro impact. So if we're talking about GHG, I think more manufacturers can start taking ownership of their utility spend through energy management tools to track and trend, understand where they're wasteful, and make opportunities for improvement. Because the Department of Energy study for the US states that of commercial and industrial facilities, it's estimated that 30% of your utility consumption is wasted, whether it's through the example of bay doors are open or inefficient roofs or insulation, whatever it may be, or inefficient equipment. So imagine 30% of your utility bill that you get to keep in your pocket every month. So how many manufacturing facilities out there are just paying their utility bills and they don't care, or they're not checking, right? So they don't understand about a third of that is to waste. But now getting to sustainability, my definition of sustainability, which I've taken this from others, is reducing waste. It's as simple as it has to be, reducing waste. If you reduce waste, it's a more sustainable process. So as a maintenance technician, I think going through the 8 steps of typical waste through like transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, inappropriate processing, and defects, again, understanding which of those I can help contribute and control, and then eliminate those. And the simplest way I can think of it for maintenance is if we're using paper-based preventive maintenance program, and then we go to a Siemens. How much paper did we just cut out, right? And that paper only has one purpose. If I'm not a regulated industry, I don't have to keep 3 years or 7 years of historical work order data. It can like get left on the desk for a month and then it goes in a burner, right? And all it was used was to convey information and retrieve information that probably nothing happens with to begin with. So if we reduce that, also think of a manufacturing facility, consider them larger, and then the amount of time technicians take responding to an issue. They probably go from where they are, they get a walkie-talkie, they go to an office, they sit down, log onto a computer, they print out a work order, get assigned a work order. Then they go to the equipment to start doing their diagnosis, start seeing what's wrong, and then they go get the tools they need. And then they spend 30 minutes to an hour going to find the parts they need, right? And then they come back over and then they fix it. And then they have to go put everything back away and they go report the fix and then rinse and repeat, right? That's a lot of wasted motion. That's a lot of wasted time as well. That's why technicians can be very inefficient in certain processes. That's an organization that doesn't have a maintenance planner. And maintenance planners aren't a critical role for, again, anyone that's probably not an enterprise. If you're an SMB manufacturer, you can probably get away without a maintenance planner, but your maintenance manager, maintenance supervisor, or lead technician, I think a best practice most people could do for sustainability purposes is start documenting more work and then dispatching through electronic means via an app for your CMMS. So having something updated, and then have documentation that's available electronically. And then also having your inventory readily available and understanding where it is and what it is. So we start reducing all that wasted motion and time or transportation between. That's a sustainable function for the business as a whole, because you're getting more efficient use out of your technicians and your human capital, but then also performing preventative maintenance. Like Max Baer said, that's a sustainability function. Think of it like a car. If you don't maintain your car, it becomes inefficient. Inefficient vehicles consume more fuel. They break down more often. They pollute more. If you maintain your car and it's very efficient and it's kept up with, it's going to last you a long time. So again, you also have to think of the procurement of that asset or that vehicle. It used a lot of resources to make that vehicle. And it was built with the intention, if you maintain it at a base level, it'll last 20 years. We've already seen with some Honda Civics and Toyota Corollas, they'll last for 30, 40 years, right? That's a reliable and a sustainable vehicle if you take care of it. And my brother growing up, he had a Honda Civic. He didn't take care of it any, right? So when he bought it, it was like 20 years old. But 5-6 years later, that thing's junk, right? And some people buy brand new cars and do that to it. Manufacturers do it to brand new equipment and do it. That's not a sustainable business model. That's not a sustainable process. Not only from a financial aspect, but the efficiency. So think of a industrial equipment, a heavy industrial piece of equipment that's not upkept with, becomes very inefficient. It's now producing more waste through defect products that don't pass quality standards. It now runs inefficiently and isn't available for production runs when needed. And it also probably pollutes more, uses more energy consumption because it's compensating for failures or things that aren't operating as intended. And then the long run too, waste to consumption, it can also become more dangerous, and it can pollute in your environment. Brake dust, right? If you have brake pads on electric or on motors, and they start tearing through the brake pads and no one's fixing it, no one's correcting it, right? Or it's tension too much, it's going to throw brake dust in the air. I'm sure that's not great for operators and your employees to breathe in. So that's a long-term, non-sustainable method and safety hazard. But also what happens if it hits catastrophic failure? And we've seen it with CNCs or hydraulic presses. And they start mystified hydraulic fluid and then catches a spark, right? And that's all because that piece of equipment probably wasn't properly maintained or safety protocols weren't followed. I guarantee you that piece of equipment wasn't very well maintained in a sustainable process and sustainable manner. Therefore, it became inefficient. And now, unfortunately, you see more and more of these catastrophic events that happen. So I think at the core, sustainability is just reducing waste. And there's a lot of waste around us that we don't realize or correlate to in certain instances. So I think just defining it and educating our frontline operators on what it means to them and how they can help.
And I mean, you actually covered quite a lot of metrics there, which is really interesting. Would you say they're actually easy to quantify? Because obviously there's a lot of metrics that aren't easy, but it sounds like there's a lot in there which you can attribute, and put back in the sustainability box, let's say.
I think it's just a mindset thing more than the actual data saying like, hey, this is not a sustainable thing. I don't think there are a lot of sustainability metrics. It's more intangibles. Like we just need to understand obviously what sustainability means, and are our actions supporting that? Are our actions that we're doing, are they sustainable?
And again, that leads back to the culture. It's like the theme running through our conversations today is how important culture is.
I said I've seen a lot of it recently, and then going through a few different educational things I've been doing. Culture just keeps coming up over and over, and it's just a pillar. Like I was watching Ted Lasso last night, right? And then I had this epiphany. Trent Grimm walks in, and they're talking about Total Football. It was the latest episode where Ted had like this epiphany. His system wasn't working. He's not a tactician anyways. And then Total Football, like the triangle offense for basketball now translate to Johan Cruyff's Total Football for the Dutch team and for Ajax and Barcelona back in the day. And Trent Grimm runs in and he goes, oh my gosh, you've been doing these slow incremental cultural changes over time that have now blossomed into this thing, blah, blah, blah. And again, it was funny watching a show that was all embedded about cultural change as well over a 3-year span, and then having this conversation about culture. And then the past 2 months, all I've read up on and seen cool statistics about is culture and how to change culture. So yeah, I think it's core to everything we do. And I think it's core to best maintenance practices. Like without a good culture, a bad culture will beat a good system any day of the week, right? If we implement Senseye at my manufacturing facility tomorrow, no matter what you tell me the ROI is, if my culture isn't built to support it or to adopt it, it's going to fail. So I think the culture is the horse before the cart here.
Exactly. And the cart being the technology, which is often the misconception is the technology is what needs to be. As long as you have the technology, the culture will follow. But as we found, that's certainly not the case.
Now they can run in tandem. They can change and evolve with each other over time, but it is highly recommended to try and get your culture right before you try to implement all these new Industry 4.0 digital transformation strategies.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think we're coming towards the end, but I just thought it'd be good for you to summarize just some of what we've talked about today. And I think culture might be mentioned here as well, but in terms of, I'm just thinking from a manufacturing perspective, they want to get started on digital transformation and being more efficient with their maintenance. So what are the sort of 3 key takeaways from your point of view to sort of get started on that journey?
That they want to become more efficient with their maintenance?
Yeah, exactly. So it could be using certain tools or whatever, but it's also, that word culture again could be mentioned too, I guess.
It depends. What is your culture now? What is your current state of performing maintenance at what service levels? That's all going to depend on, what end of the spectrum your efficiency gains you can expect, right? If it's like big jumps because you're going from nothing to something, or if it's little incremental improvements. I think the right tool for the right people. Make sure if you do have a tool in place, people are actually using it. People enjoy using it and it fits their needs. Stop trying to fit square pegs in a round hole, right? For me, there's no way I was using an ERP maintenance module. Again, it may have just been the one I had tested out, I had tried. It just wasn't for me. I didn't like it. I had already seen a CMMS prior to, so I already was biased coming in, right? I was like, oh no, this thing is so much better, right? So much more efficiencies. I think the next is, if you're still in that reactive culture, mapping out the process of how you're going to become more proactive. And that's a cultural thing, right? A CMMS isn't going to fix that. A CMMS will support that. But you really need to understand, again, just like run to failure. Run to failure is a valid maintenance strategy. And you can track your run to failure in a CMMS, by the way, work order history, trend detection, right? Using that data to start justifying when we replace things. Because if we run it to failure, maybe it's not going to last the 10 years that they told us was going to if we did this. So the right tool for the right people. The next is understanding the appropriate service levels that you need to meet production, right? Everything in a manufacturing facility is support for production. Everything revolves around production, right? The company doesn't make money if we're not producing a trinket, no matter how good our supply chain is, no matter how good our maintenance function is, no matter how squared away our financials are, right? If production isn't running, you're not doing anything. So understand what service levels and what PM to reactive ratio or corrective ratio you can balance to meet your production needs. And that's an economical balance too, right? Because it costs money to perform maintenance and it costs money to not perform maintenance. So you have to strike the balance. I think that will help in the efficiency of knowing you're performing the right maintenance at the right times, unlike the Navy, right? Where we're just always doing it just because we have to do it, not because of rhyme or reason. It's just what we've always done. And then I think the third is for efficiency, and this kind of follows the maturity scale as well, is start utilizing the data. Start looking at the data, start to either through Pareto analysis or reliability data points like mean time to repair, mean time between failure. Start understanding where your bad actors in your operation are. Start to understand and correlate problem cause codes through root cause analysis or 5 whys, whatever methodology you use. And then understand, go through that OODA loop again of observe, orient, decide, act, and understand it's all about vision, right? Even culture, it's all about vision. Someone has to have a vision of where you want to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You have to understand what that vision is. You have to go in and say, okay, here's where we are now. Here's where we want to be. And then here's how we're going to get there. So I think in first phase of maintenance efficiencies, people just want a better system to track what they're doing. Whether you stay reactive or you're pretty proactive now, you just need the right tool that people are going to use. That's foundational, right? You could be 199% proactive maintenance, but you don't have any data because you lack the right tool for the right people to make it easy for them to capture. Or if you have the right tool, you're not getting any data because you're not doing you're not getting any data you can decide and make insights off of because you lack the appropriate service levels and the work orders to tell you if you're doing a good job or not, if you're meeting your production needs. But again, if you have the right tool and you're doing all the right service levels, do you have data? Can you make any decisions off of that data? So I think the data piece is the part that everyone needs to start going to. And I think a lot of people are. And that's where the Industry 4.0 comes in, that fully connected manufacturing stack of sharing information, right? A CMMS, what the goal of a CMMS is to do is, if you're doing it in a proactive state, is to maximize the availability of your equipment. That's a data point. That's a data point that a lot of manufacturers track for their OEE calculation, right? A CMMS traditionally is not going to do your quality or your throughput ratio for your OEE calculation, right? So it's just going to do the availability piece. So it needs to be integrated and push that data into other integrated technologies in your environment that share that data with each other. Think of the inventory. CMMSs have inventory modules. But again, a lot of people keep that data in their ERP. So now you have this gap between your maintenance technicians are the one consuming the materials for repairs, but we track the master data in ERP, and the two aren't connected. And that becomes an issue, right? And then you lack the data to make appropriate purchase order decisions. When do we stock parts? At what point do we stock them, right? Et cetera. So I think to summarize, we talked a lot about culture. I think it all starts with a vision. You have to get your culture right before you can make any real change or support long-term any good, meaningful change. I think you need to put the right people in place with the right tools. And then you need to understand what's the balance. Not every manufacturing facility is world-class 80-20 PM to reactive ratio, right? Some can be 50-50, and that makes sense for them. But you can only make that decision if you have the data. So I think CMMSs can do all of that. You can add on top the PDM piece, or you can skip some of that in between and go right to a PDM, right? It's not unlinear. You don't have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? We talk about crawl, walk, run. That's really the methodology and the mindset you have to have going into implementing a new software, not necessarily how you adopt new softwares and how you scale and grow.
Yeah. No, exactly. Some really good takeaways there as well. So yeah, I mean, we've come to the end, but it's been an absolute pleasure, Corey, to pick your brains, especially with your background and experience. It's been a learning curve for me as well. Actually, I've learned a lot of new things. So it's been a real pleasure, and thank you again for taking part.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I hope all of my little short rambles there were useful for some people. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I guess just finally, how can people find out about Brightly? I guess what's the best way to find out more about Brightly and what you guys are doing?
Brightlysoftware.com. It's the easiest way. Like I said, we're a Siemens company. We're also on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. Playing around with being active or not, putting out content, see what happens, see what people like or what they don't. So you can find us brightlysoftware.com.
Yeah, I should probably say for my own research purposes, I did look at some of Corey's posts and a bit of background as well. Some really interesting stuff there. So I definitely recommend connecting with him. I'll put the links in the show notes as well, so everyone can.
If you like memes, I try to keep it light. I don't take myself too seriously. So post some memes, have some fun, use my experiences in manufacturing, some conversations I've had. Obviously, blur out names and stuff or mask them, and then make them into memes and share them, because I think that's how my generation communicates, right? That's how most of us courted our partners we're with, is through gifts or through memes, right? You can make someone laugh, you make a friend.
Exactly. And we're talking about human connection here. So if you can make that human connection for a meme, I see nothing wrong with that either. That's a marketing person speaking as well. So brilliant. So yeah, thanks again, Corey. Thanks again to everyone listening to this series, and we'll be back again very soon.